All right, let's dive into one of the biggest questions in all of philosophy, all thanks to René Descartes. Is your mind just a ghost in the machine? Are you a non-physical self that's just kind of driving your physical body around? Today, we are breaking down his incredibly famous and controversial theory of substance dualism.
So here's the game plan. First, we're going to figure out what substance dualism even means. Then, we'll walk through Descartes' arguments for why you should believe it. After that, we're going to put those arguments to the test and see where they fall short. We'll wrap up with the single biggest problem for his theory, how the mind and body could possibly interact, and see what big mystery we're left with at the end.
So let's just start with the question that gets right to the heart of it all. Think about it. Are you your body? Or does it feel like the real you, your consciousness, your thoughts, your feelings, is something separate, like a non-physical pilot in a physical ship? This is the exact puzzle Descartes was obsessed with solving.
Okay, to really get a grip on Descartes' whole idea, we have to break down the name itself, substance dualism. Let's take a look at what each of those words really means when a philosopher uses them. First up, substance. Now, we're not talking about chemicals in a lab. In philosophy, a substance is the fundamental stuff of a thing, its essence. Think about a chair. You can change its properties, right? You can paint it red, move it to another room, but it's still the same chair. That essential chairness that stays the same, that's the substance.
And dualism? Well, that one's pretty simple. It's just the idea that reality is made of two fundamental kinds of stuff. Not one, not three, two. So put them together, and substance dualism is just the theory that there are two totally different kinds of essential stuff that make up everything in the universe.
So what are these two substances for Descartes? Well, on one hand, you've got mental substance, the mind. It's the thing that thinks, feels, and perceives. Its nature, it's immaterial, you can't divide it, and it doesn't take up any space. Then, on the other hand, you have physical substance, the body. It has properties like weight and height, it exists in a specific location, and you can definitely divide it into parts. For Descartes, these two things were polar opposites. So how does he prove they're so different? He uses a really powerful logical tool called Leibniz's law. Just think of it like this. If Superman and Clark Kent are actually the same person, then they have to share all the same properties. If you find even one property that one has and the other doesn't, like, say, the ability to fly, then they cannot be the same person. They're not identical. This law is the weapon Descartes is going to use to argue that the mind is not the body.
So, with Leibniz's law in his back pocket, Descartes builds his case. He comes up with two main arguments to prove that the mind and body have to be different substances, basically by showing that they don't share the same properties. Let's break them down.
His first argument is from divisibility, and honestly, it's pretty straightforward. Your body is a physical thing, right? It takes up space. That means you can always, at least in theory, divide it into smaller parts. An arm, a leg, a cell, an atom. But your mind, Descartes says, your consciousness, that has no parts. You can't have half a thought. It's a single, unified whole.
And Descartes says it best himself. He argues that even if you cut off a foot or an arm, you haven't taken anything away from the mind itself. So the body has the property of being divisible, and the mind has the property of being indivisible. And according to Leibniz's law, if they have different properties, they cannot be the same thing. Boom! Case closed. Or is it?
Okay, his second argument is a little more abstract. It's all based on conceivability, or what he can clearly imagine. It goes something like this. He says, I can have a clear idea of my mind existing all by itself, without a body. And I can have a clear idea of my body just existing as a machine, without a mind. Then he says, well, if I can clearly conceive of this separation, then an all-powerful God could actually make it happen. And if it's even possible for them to exist apart, then they must be two fundamentally different things.
So, there you have it. That's Descartes' case. You've got an indivisible mind, a divisible body, and a separation he can clearly imagine. It sounds pretty neat, right? Well, not so fast. His logic did not go unchallenged, and philosophers and scientists pretty quickly started poking some major holes in his arguments.
Let's start with that first argument, the one from divisibility. Descartes was so sure that the mind was this one unified thing that you could never split. But what if he was wrong? What does modern psychology and neuroscience have to say about this?
Well, it turns out that modern science gives us some pretty compelling evidence that the mind isn't so indivisible after all. You have psychological conditions like dissociative identity disorder, which can result in what look like functionally split personalities. And even more amazing are the split brain experiments. When you sever the connection between the brain's two hemispheres, you can get what look like two independent streams of consciousness in one person. All of a sudden, that indivisible mind idea starts to look really shaky.
And there's another problem with that divisibility argument. It just assumes that all physical things can be divided up like a body can. But think about it. What about something like a magnetic field or the temperature of a room? These are definitely physical phenomena, but you can't really divide them into little bits. So the whole premise of the argument is kind of built on shaky ground.
Okay, so what about his second argument, the one from conceivability? This one slams right into a huge philosophical wall. Is what you can imagine in your head a reliable guide to what's actually possible in the real world? Just because you can picture something, does that really mean it could happen?
Yeah, this argument has some big problems. For one, it kind of depends on the existence of God, which, is a premise not everyone is on board with. But the bigger issue is that what we can conceive of isn't proof of what's possible. I can easily imagine leaping over a mountain in a single jump, but that doesn't make it physically possible for me to do. Imagination is just not a foolproof guide to reality.
And here's a really fun objection to think about, often called the Cheshire Cat problem. From Alice in Wonderland, the physical cat vanishes, but its non-physical smile is left behind. The point is, if we can even conceive of a physical thing transforming into a non-physical property, then that absolute, unbridgeable gap that Descartes insisted on, well, it just kind of falls apart.
But the criticisms don't stop there. In fact, we now arrive at the biggest, most famous, and maybe the most devastating challenge of all, the one that has haunted dualism for centuries. We're talking about the problem of interaction.
The problem really boils down to this. If the mind and body are made of two completely different types of stuff, how in the world do they talk to each other? How do they interact? It's like asking, if your mind is a non-physical ghost and your body is a physical car, how exactly does the ghost push the gas pedal? How can something with no physical properties make a physical object move?
And modern science makes this problem even worse. There's a principle called the causal closure of physics. It sounds complicated, but the basic idea is that any physical event, from a star exploding to you deciding to lift your arm, has a complete physical cause. There's a chain of physical causes and effects, like neurons firing and muscles contracting. There's just no room in that chain for a non-physical soul to jump in and change things. It goes against our entire scientific understanding of the universe.
And, this isn't some new criticism we came up with. People were pointing this out from day one. One of Descartes' sharpest critics was Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. She wrote to him and asked this exact question. She wanted to know how a substance that only thinks could possibly cause the body to move. And to be honest, Descartes never really came up with a good answer.
So, where does all this leave us? On one hand, Descartes gave us this really neat, intuitive theory that just feels right to a lot of people, this feeling that we're a self living inside a body. But on the other hand, that theory faces some absolutely crushing challenges from both logic and science.
In the end, Descartes gave us a solution to the mind-body problem that was clear and elegant, but also deeply, deeply flawed. And while most philosophers today have rejected his brand of dualism, he did us a huge favor by framing the question so perfectly. Because if our mind isn't some separate, ghostly substance, then what is it? How does the wet, gray, physical stuff of our brain create the entire private universe of our thoughts? That is the profound mystery Descartes left for us, and it's one we are still trying to solve today.